Okay, so hey everybody, and welcome back to another AzBytes, the show where we bite-size Azure tech for business leaders. My name is John, and I'm here with my co-host Ty as ever. And today we're going to kick things off with a huge question: can cloud storage really match on-prem performance? Some say no way, but we're about to bust that wide open, Ty. Right?
Absolutely, John. So, have you ever heard the phrase performance so good you think you're going to be on-prem? Well, by the end of this episode, you might be saying just that. We have an exciting, in fact, it's an amazing topic and a very, very special guest with us today. So, viewers, grab a coffee, beer, tea, whatever you want to keep you going. You don't want to miss this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to be talking about everything to do with Azure NetApp Files, which is an Azure native first-party service that promises on-prem like speed in the cloud, with a whole lot more, of course. So we're going to explore its technical superpowers. We're going to look at some real business benefits, and we're going to even tackle a few myths, the top 5 myths swirling around ANF. And to help us do that, we've got the amazing, incredible expertise from NetApp joining us in the discussion.
That's right, John. So, for our viewers, please welcome Mr. Anthony Mashford from NetApp. Anthony, welcome to AZ Bytes, mate. It's great to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks, Ty. It's great to be here. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Do you want to tell us a little bit about you, Anthony? What are you doing at NetApp at the minute?
So, so my role, John, is I work in the NetApp Azure Business Group as a cloud solution architect. My team, we are focused on the Azure NetApp Files product, and essentially assisting customers to understand the product, its capabilities, and how they can leverage it to the benefit of the workloads they're looking to run on Azure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, feel free to bring kind of that mixed blend between technical and business perspective, because I think that's really what's going to make this video really exciting for our audience, which, primarily, hopefully, is those tech savvy business leaders out there. So, right, okay, let's set the stage then. So I guess, Anthony, many enterprises today, they worry that moving these heavy workloads into the cloud might mean sacrificing performance, or maybe getting a bit of a migraine from all the complexities, or blowing the budget, right? I'm sure all that kind of stuff sounds familiar. So I think today, this discussion, we'd love to challenge some of those worries head on. Ty, what do you think?
Absolutely. But I think what we should do is let's start at the basics for anybody new to Azure NetApp Files. So, Anthony, give us the elevator pitch. What is Azure NetApp Files and why should businesses care? Over to you, mate.
Sure, thanks. So Azure NetApp Files, or as we refer to it, ANF, is high performance, low latency, network attached file storage. Simple. No, I'm joking. It's not that simple, right? It's a very sort of complex service, but actually very simple to consume. I think the first thing to understand is really the why ANF exists. Now, Azure NetApp Files, as of today, which is sort of mid-October, is almost 6.5 years in general availability. So it's been as part of the platform for a long time. And it's also important to remember it's a first party service. This is a Microsoft service, delivered, supported, built by Microsoft, underpinned using NetApp's technology, but it's first party. And the reason it exists is because back then, before ANF existed, customers wanted to move workloads from the data centers that were reliant on network attached file-based storage that had certain performance and latency requirements. It was a challenge, and for those of us who've been around long enough to remember those challenges, it was difficult. You have to deploy a scale-out file server and a first file cluster, and then you need machines, manage disks, and you probably need more of them of greater size, and costs could escalate, right? And also performance wasn't good. So Microsoft needed to address that. And essentially, who better than NetApp? NetApp has been in this game for well over 30 years, and Microsoft and NetApp have a partnership spanning many decades. So that was created, and the Azure NetApp Files product was spawned. And it's there to essentially meet those requirements for high performance, low latency, but also I think in that time, and we'll probably discuss this throughout the conversation, is Microsoft have also developed the service and introduced many more features and capabilities, which actually makes ANF more compelling for other workloads.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So what I'm hearing there, Anthony, is it's basically like a standard file storage system in Azure, but on steroids, right? Something like that.
Yeah, exactly. There is the Azure Files offering, right, which is part of the Azure ecosystem, and that's a good service. But ANF has the capability to deliver extremely high IOPS and throughput, and most importantly, low latency. Even more so in the age of AI, right, where some of these applications are very latency sensitive. And the service was to create to handle, the demands. And back then, the term was coined "migrate the unmigratable." So again, it's those workloads which were seen as, they just weren't fit for public cloud. ANF was a huge enabler to unblocking those migrations. Databases like Oracle, SQL, enterprise applications such as SAP, high performance compute. ANF was built for those.
Oh, and I had a word in there that I quite like, unmigratable. That is a super, super strong word. So, ANF is making the impossible possible. What do you think, Anthony?
Exactly, yes, 100%. Microsoft and NetApp co-developed ANF to be a native Azure service. You create your accounts, you create your compatibles, you create your volumes, and you present them to your virtual machines. And Microsoft take care of the rest. They take care of, let's say, the heavy lifting. There's no need to monitor, manage, and maintain a platform. You can simply consume it. And there's no need for those like servers or storage arrays to host them yourself. As I said about the scale up file servers or NFS clusters, because ANF supports the file protocols, NFS, SMB, and indeed dual protocol, and that's a USP for within Azure. The only file service that can handle dual protocol, where we've got backend systems on Linux writing to volumes being accessed by front-end Windows clients, and it's built on NetApp's storage operating system, ONTAP. And this is where you get the enterprise grade data management capability, snapshots, cloning, backup, replication, etc., all built into the service. It really is enterprise grade.
No, absolutely. I think what I'm hearing there, Anthony, and basically because it is that bare metal service in Azure, we're not really dealing with, virtual appliances or VMs or anything along those lines that we've got to manage and feed and water. It truly is what I'm hearing, that Microsoft and NetApp engineered service that they've done jointly, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's difficult to do this. Microsoft and NetApp have absolutely nailed this, because those services which rely on it, if you think about integrating that into essentially a multi-tenanted platform at scale and maintain that performance, it's huge challenges. The things like being able to implement rapid backups, restores, they can be lifesavers against corruption, deletion, or God forbid, ransomware, right? There's also the cloning capabilities, and the replication. ANF offers cross-region, cross-zone replication. So customers essentially have choice, and they can architect it. They can architect the workloads to run on top of the platform as they wish. And Microsoft have gone a long way to certifying the Azure platform in general. The compliance standards, HIPAA, GDPR, and ANF does offer a 99.99% SLA, which I think is important. That's one of the highest SLAs for storage in Azure.
Oh, that's interesting. So what I'm hearing there, it's actually more than just performance. It's about having all the proper true enterprise features available, but as a service. So, Anthony, why don't you give us a few examples of what that means for our viewers?
Well, I think there's numerous workloads that ANF fits really well with. We've mentioned a few like the Oracle database, SQL, SAP, high performance compute. But ANF is a solid service, and even for things like just general purpose file shares. That wasn't why ANF was spawned. ANF was originally created to address latency and performance, but most recently, Microsoft have introduced capabilities such as full access tiering. There's reserved capacity options, and most recently, flexible service level was introduced, which is actually helping customers to consume ANF, maintain that enterprise grade storage capability, but at a much cheaper price point. ANF can drive hundreds of thousands of IOPS and throughput of up to 12.5 gigabit per second. So it's a very, very capable service, and because it's now a very mature service, it's actually a very well-rounded service as well. And I think that the latency, as I said previously, because of the world of AI that we're in now, latency is becoming even more and more important.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a valid point, right, Anthony? I think basically what I'm getting here from ANF, it's really trying to offer, everything that enterprise storage array would typically offer, but in that cloud platform. So we've got performance, we've got advanced features, reliability, and it's all kind of consumed on an on-demand cloud service, Ty, right?
Absolutely. And don't forget, there's no managing physical storage. So it sounds a little bit too good to be true.
Yeah.
What do you think, John?
Well, yeah. I mean, maybe let's not put our rose-tinted glass on just yet, right? I think we've all learned from that. But look, I guess maybe it's time to compare it with some other options that we see, where ANF is truly going to shine, right? So I guess, Anthony, you mentioned Azure's own general storage services like Azure Files. If I'm an IT decision maker, I might ask, why not just use Azure Files? I know you mentioned the IOPS difference there, or I might be thinking, why don't I just run my own file server on a VM? What is it that makes ANF so special, Anthony?
Um, it's ONTAP. ONTAP is NetApp's storage operating system, right? And as I said, that has been developed for many, many years. And ONTAP brings those data management capabilities. Azure Files, I said, they're good offerings, right? They have a place, but it's based on requirement. What do you need to do with your data? Do you need to store it, or do you want to manage it? And I think that's where ANF really comes to the fore, because it exposes those ONTAP capabilities, which essentially allow customers to manage the data.
Anything else to add there, Anthony? Or can we go into some of the performance characteristics? Tell us about them.
Well, performance characteristics, the performance we normally see, for like the high-end workloads, ANF can, really, really stretch its legs. And, we have customers that are working with, high performance compute EDA solutions. We have customers that have Oracle platforms, SQL platforms, some customers running VDI platforms, which normally doesn't necessarily need high I/O consistently, but some of the workloads they're running on top of those platforms, graphic design, CAD, those sorts of things, they really challenge ANF. But ANF has the capability to deliver because of the scalability and the flexibility of the solution. As I mentioned, the ability to drive hundreds of thousands of IOPS, high throughput. And with our large volumes, we can get up to 12.5 throughput. And we see that, especially in EDA and the requirements of it, and the ability to scale and flex. You can take an ANF volume from as small as 1 terabyte up to 2 petabytes, on demand. And if you think about that in a traditional on-premises data center sense, you might have to do a procurement exercise to go and buy additional storage to meet that, right? Without being sort of too blasé, you can do this with your credit card. Put your credit card details in, ask for what you need, and you've got it more or less on demand. And I think that is another example of Microsoft's democratization of technology. Microsoft have done this for years, and with the cloud computing platform and Azure especially, it gives customers choice and the ability to scale.
So guys, for us viewers out there, what that actually means is that 12.5 gigabytes per second is like downloading a full HD movie in, well, a fraction of a second. It's crazy. What else should we know, Anthony? What else do you think our viewers would like to hear around ANF?
I think, some things that often come up is around price. Price can be challenging. Obviously, cost is, a lot of customers are very cost conscious. But I think the headline really is simplicity. It's a very simplistic service to interact with. It's first party, Azure native, integrated into the Azure Resource Management plane. And we have customers that, they don't want to be managing services. They've got a cloud first mentality. They want to just consume services. We use the term volume as a service. So customers can create their capacity, the count's capacity pools, volumes, present them to the hosts and consume as they wish. They haven't got to worry about the overhead of looking after it. And believe it or not, that can go a long way to, impacting on the total cost of ownership.
No, it's brilliant to hear, Anthony. And one of the conversations I got in not too long ago actually was with the customer using, ANF for some of those large and heavy workloads, things like large databases and analytics across, kind of millions of small files, 3D rendering, things like that. And I just can't help but think, but if it's good enough to do things like that, and create oil and gas simulations and chip design, it's probably going to be good enough to run my SQL workloads or a VDI environment, right, Anthony?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've got a nice anecdote about a customer I've been working with in the United Kingdom, running on SQL, many large SQL instances, and they're a long-term Azure customer. Their business growth, was driving more requirement on more capable resources, and their projected growth for the machines they ran SQL on, which were originally 48 core, within 18 months they were staring down machine sizes of over 100 cores, I think 112 cores, and expense starts to ramp up, right? But they weren't CPU driven requirements. They were storage driven requirements. Then those large machines were required to deliver more disks, larger disks to get the storage. So we actually went through a proof of concept, which was very interesting because they really performance tested ANF because they had concerns, right? Justifiably, performance, latency, will it work? We had a very successful proof of concept. They accepted the service, they migrated, and after the migration, they managed to downsize those VMs to 16 cores. They're still growing, but they're growing the storage independently of the VMs, which is making it much more cost effective and a lot more flexible as well, because they can flex the storage independent of the machines. So for those types of workloads, SQL, Oracle, absolutely. And we see it in VDI as well. If you think about VDI, where you get login storms, right? Customers, I don't know, 8 a.m., 10 a.m., everyone's coming into work, logging in, you get the spike, then it tails off through the working day, and there might be a short spike at the end of the day as people log off. You can flex the ANF storage to meet the demand. And I think it's important, performance optimization in a public cloud has a natural byproduct of cost optimization. So if you can flex to meet performance requirements, delivering the service to your end users or your customers, you can also help to drive down expenditure.
And actually, that's a fantastic point, that which I'm going to reiterate again. So what we're doing is we're getting a unified storage, which means that we're driving efficiency, getting rid of deduplication, and ultimately making sure that we've streamlined his operations. Do you agree with that, Anthony?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that is why it's there. Public cloud, the benefit of public cloud is choice, and you can scale up, you can scale down, you can flex it to meet your needs. And customers who adopt that mindset, they're successful. They're successful by delivering a reliable platform and also a cost-effective platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing to kind of reiterate there is from a cost point of view, I suppose, Anthony, I suspect cost is going to be one of those areas where people have probably got a little bit of a misconception. In fact, this is probably not a bad kind of segue into a bit of a myth busting session, even because I can probably guarantee that one of these myths is going to be Azure NetApp Files is too expensive. What do you think, Ty? Should we delve into a few myths here?
Definitely, let's do it. I think it's time to go myth busting, 100%.
Here we go. Here we go.
Anthony,
Come on, bring it on.
here we go. So we've got, generally speaking, there's 4 or 5 that we've lined up for you. There's always number one, cloud storage can't match on-prem performance. That's got to be a classic one. Do you think, John?
I mean, it is classic. Many still believe moving to the cloud means sacrificing speed and low latency, right, Anthony? So what have you got to say about that?
Well, in reality, cloud storage, can not only match but sometimes better on-premises performance. It can actually outstrip that because of everything we're talking about. The fact that it's delivered as part of a hyperscaler deployment with many resources behind it. ANF can hit performance figures that would make a storage admin on premises drool. We're talking 450,000 IOPS, double digit gigabytes per second, from a single volume. In real terms, that means you can run the workloads, as you mentioned, SAP HANA, Oracle databases or high performance compute, and get the same response times. Or if not, indeed better. Microsoft has had ANF certified for SAP HANA. And this means, that's very stringent performance requirements in memory databases, right? So to meet those performance, that straight away tells most people actually ANF can perform. It's got what it can actually deliver what it's been. And remember, this performance is not just about raw speed; it's also about consistency, having that consistent performance for latency, especially. And ANF gives a guarantee around the service levels. You've got standard, premium, ultra, and also you mentioned the new flexible service level. So you can dramatically scale, up or down, when needed, and sort of during things like month-end processing, payroll, the upcoming Black Friday events, right? You can scale it up to meet demand, and afterwards scale it back down again. With ANF, the performance is there when you need it, but then you're not stuck with an over-provisioned system that you don't need.
And do you know what? They're all fantastic points. So what I'm hearing, and then what I'm going to echo is performance on demand. So do you know what, John? Myth number one, gone. That bites the dust. Yeah. Right. Clearly, very clearly, and so there's no ambiguity. Cloud storage can be as fast or faster than on-premise in the right environment, right scenario, and with the right tools. So, number two, Azure NetApp Files is just complicated to use. You need to be a storage guru. Now, I hear this all the time. You need to have a NetApp techie with you who's going to do this, that, and the other, and special skills. So, Anthony, true or false? Do you need special NetApp techie skills?
False.
Good.
So Azure NetApp Files, I think I've already mentioned, it's a very simplistic service to interact with. Any customer is using Azure, they know to use Azure, right? So if you know to use the Azure portal or the tools associated with that, such as Azure Bicep, God forbid ARM templates, on Azure CLI, Terraform, then you can manage and deploy ANF, right? It's very, very simplistic. It's fully integrated into the Azure Resource Management Plane. There's no intricate setup. Microsoft do the heavy lifting behind the scenes, so the flexibility doesn't mean complexity. To give a practical example, if you say you want highly available file share for a new application in Azure NetApp Files, you go into the portal, you create an ANF account, you create a capacity pool, you create a volume, and you present the volume to your host. It's as simple as that, or you can do it programmatically using the API. There's no need to replicate data to another region. A few clicks, if there's a need to replicate data, with a few clicks or bit configuration in the code, you can implement, for instance, say cross-zone or cross-region replication. And in fact, actually, ANF now has the ability to do cross-region and zone replication from the same volume. So, and all of this, because it's a Microsoft service, all the documentation is available on Microsoft Learn. So anyone who's familiar with Azure, they could do this. You no longer need to be a storage admin.
Loving it. I'm loving it. Easy to use, couple of clicks, done. John, give me a myth from you, mate.
Yeah, okay. What we on now, Ty? Number three.
Number
myth number three then. So here we go. Anthony, Azure NetApp Files is only for Linux or niche workloads. It won't work for my Windows apps. I suspect this myth arose because NetApp's heritage is with NFS or Unix, Linux kind of environments. But what's the reality, Anthony? Give it to me.
Well, that's another false. So I think, but also just to point out, ANF, when it was first created, only supported NFS. SMB, dual protocol were brought down the line. But as I said, we're getting close to 7 years of general availability. So Microsoft has introduced many additional capabilities, and SMB obviously was part of that journey. And the reality is Azure NetApp Files has both capability for Linux, so NFS, Windows, SMB, dual protocol, as I've mentioned. And with SMB, it integrates into Active Directory for authentication and access control. Very simplistic integration. So the Windows-based workloads can live quite comfortably, with ANF. On the Linux side of the fence, you've got NFS versions 3 and 4.1. It's also supported. You can have dual protocol. Customers that are using ANF for many, many different workload types. And ultimately, there are multiple choices now for protocol.
No, perfect. Myth busted then. So whether it's Windows, Linux, mainstream, or specialized, basically, Anthony, ANF is going to have you covered then, yeah? So another myth busted.
I'm doing well, aren't I? I'm doing well. That's what's that.
You're doing good.
3 out of 3. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Number 4, though, is my absolute favourite because I do hear this all the time. And it is, are you ready for this, Anthony? Azure NetApp Files is too expensive. All right. Now, I think we need to tackle this head on. Is ANF pricey? How do we justify the cost? Over to you.
Right. Yeah, this old chestnut. Right. Okay. I love this. I actually enjoy these conversations. So I grant you, right? If somebody looks at the price per gigabyte of Azure NetApp files, they're going to go, "Wow, that's expensive," especially somebody who's coming from an on-premises environment. This service is the enterprise-grade data management for network-attached file storage in Azure. It's built on ONTAP's technology. And customers need to consider the wider TCO with this, right? What are the requirements? What do you need to do with your data? Being able to right-size environments to meet demand when required is where Azure has its strengths, and ANF, being an Azure native service, functions in the same way. It's all about value for performance, and ANF also features things the way you can optimize it. We're using things like cool access tier, being able to flex using reserved capacity, leveraging that capability with a cloud mindset. Customers can actually really sort of drive down expenditure. I have customers that are actually saving a lot of money by using ANF over other workloads. I think we might discuss one down the line, but yeah, the ability, the features, the capabilities that ANF has, combined with the fact that it's a very simplistic service to interact with. Think if you're a project manager. I've had this project when I've been supporting customers with projects, project management team saying, who do I need? Do I need a network admin? Do I need the guy to run the server platform? Do I need a Linux guy? Do I need a storage guy? No. So straight away, you can argue you actually don't need a storage admin. So if you're thinking about standing up a project team, there's a substantial cost maybe already reduced. And also the post deployment, the operational impact. One of the customers I work with, by moving from one storage platform to ANF, reduced the help desk calls by 90% because of all the reliability and no longer relying on manual interaction to do something. So yes, absolutely. If you're looking at price per gigabyte, I agree that Azure NetApp Files can seem to be expensive, but it's enterprise grade storage management capability. If you want to be able to manage your storage, Azure NetApp Files can do it for you. If you simply need to store something, maybe Azure NetApp Files isn't the right service for you. But ANF, I feel, actually delivers really good value for customers, both on performance and price.
Amazing. Now, normally what happens in the Azure world, as our viewers know, that we can do reserved instances, and taking a reserved instance, we normally see savings. Now, I think I've seen somewhere that it's around a third of the cost. Is that roughly right, Anthony?
Yes. So the capabilities, or the what customers can lean on to help drive down this. They've cool access tier, reserve capacity. There's two. If with the reservations, they're available in 100 terabyte, 1 petabyte chunks, with various discounts. Obviously, if a customer has a discount with Azure already, you can't stack them, so it's always the highest one that wins. But if you then combine reservations with cool access, by offloading data to cool access, which is essentially moving the blocks of data to a cheaper storage tier, and with the Azure reserve capacity for ANF as well, then yes, absolutely, we have customers of higher than 30% savings. It really does vary on the customer workload and data change, etc. But no, absolutely, 30% I would suggest is probably the minimum they should see.
Amazing. So what I'm hearing from you is ANF isn't too expensive if we're looking at the big picture, total cost of ownership. Yes, it may seem more pounds and pence per gig than a normal cloud disk, but actually by looking at reducing the project risk, time, speed, performance, process, we can avoid other expenses. So for me, John, if you agree, myth busted.
I think so, Ty. I think it's just always that same situation, right? I think when you're looking as a techie at that kind of, like you say, price per gig, per disk, whatever you might be doing, is you're failing to kind of look at that higher level TCO, as Anthony has kind of pointed out there, and that kind of, complete picture, I guess, of the entire project that you're working on. But yeah, I'm happy. Myth is busted. Right, should we go on to the last one then? Number 5.
Oh, as I said, the pressure's on now. We've got 4 out of 4.
Yeah, this is it. So can we get 5 from 5, Anthony? Right then.
I'm determined to get 100% here, guys.
Here we go. My data won't be secure or safe in NetApp file in Azure NetApp Files, Anthony. So last one, it's the trust factor. Some people worry about putting critical data into cloud services, security, reliability, vendor locking, etc. How can we address these concerns, Anthony?
Yeah, and it's 100% a valid concern, right? You're essentially entrusting your platforms, your services, your applications and data to someone else, really. But ultimately, customers manage this, and customers have the ability to secure it, right? And ANF is secure by design. It has enterprise-grade security built into it. Data at rest is encrypted using AES-256 encryption, and ANF actually has two options for data at rest. You've got single and double encryption. Single encryption, software encryption, double encryption, software and hardware encryption. So, and double encryption does come at a premium, slightly more expensive, but if it's a requirement, the business, requirement to have it, then you have choice, right? You can also, leverage the keys system, Microsoft managed keys, or indeed now customer managed keys. So by default, the data is encrypted using platform keys or Microsoft managed keys. But customers now have the option to bring their own key with the customer managed key feature in conjunction with Azure Key Vault. Regarding in transit, customers can use SMB encryption. I'll be very honest to say that if you do implement SMB encryption, that can have quite a performance overhead. But if there's a requirement for it, for data in transit via SMB, then you can implement SMB encryption. And also, you've got NFS 4.1, which can be encrypted as well. And Azure NetApp Files lives within the customer's VNet infrastructure, which ultimately they have control of. It's not exposed to the public internet. It has no public endpoint, unlike Azure Files, which does. And if you think about it, when you're deploying Azure Files for maybe the workloads we're talking about, you wouldn't want them to be publicly accessible, so you have to go and lock all those things down. ANF doesn't have that. You can even use features such as network security groups to be more tight about how the traffic actually flows around the network. So yeah, I mean, security wise, I think from both Microsoft and NetApp side, I think ANF actually is extremely secure service and actually secure by design.
Anthony, you ought to be a sniper, mate. You've just shot through them myths like they've all gone, no problems at all. And
5 out of
for
5.
any skeptics out there, I hope that you're feeling a lot better and comfortable with NetApp, Azure NetApp Files. Over to you, John.
I feel like we should have had like a big firework going off there. No, brilliant stuff. Thanks for that, Anthony. I think it's great to kind of talk through some of these things to help people to understand them a little bit deeper. So, really appreciate that. But look, before we wrap up, I'd love to hear, if you've got one, Anthony, a bit of a quick, real world story or a really golden nugget takeaway from you at the minute. Maybe a story or a stat that really highlights ANF's impact. Have you got anything like that you could delve into maybe quickly, Anthony?
Yeah, absolutely. There is one which I think actually probably talks to all of the conversation we've just had, really, and that's with a very large online retailer. They moved to Azure, I think, around about 2017, and they had a requirement for network attached file storage, and they used another file storage option. Fast forward a few years, ANF becomes available, and they were having challenges with that storage platform. Reliability, availability, performance, cost was quite big. It was growing, and these guys were developers and DBAs, right? And they had to learn how to manage the original storage platform, which they weren't keen on. If they onboarded someone into the team, they had to train that person who they hired as a developer to also be a storage admin. It was challenging. Anyway, we, the teams, both Microsoft and ourselves, working with a customer, because they were already on Azure, right? So it wasn't, we're not getting them onto the platform. This was helping them to, really leverage Azure to its benefit and essentially some modernization, right? We got them onto ANF proof of concept. Proof of concept was successful, could tick all the boxes, and then we migrated them. And we did a TCO as part of the migration to give them a rough indication of whether or not they could save, what they could save. We had a number. Anyway, after 1 year of running on the platform, the customer managed to reduce their batch processing time, because it was running an Oracle batch processing system, by 40%. The challenges it had previous to that was these batch processes were running overnight and straying into the working day, which means systems weren't available to staff to start using, and then they get help desk calls and complaints and blah, blah, blah. By moving to ANF, they reduced that batch processing time by 40%, which actually meant the batch processes were finished way before the working day. And to use the customer's term, it gave them white space where they could do maintenance or react to any problems they needed to address. But ultimately, it made the system available to their end users. Operational efficiency went through the roof because ANF, being Azure native, everything was done in pipelines. So the backup, snapshot cloning, all that sort of stuff, deployments, all done using code. So there was none of this manual intervention anymore. And they used the way it was almost like fire and forget. Once they configured it, they fired it off, it worked. They have monitoring in place to monitor performance, everything else, and then they could flex as they needed. But I think the biggest impact for this customer, and I suppose this is back to the price, because the customer was running this in a single landing zone in the same subscription, for them to actually monitor costs was quite easy. They just looked at the subscription cost. And the lead, the platform lead at the customer, shared the story with us. We estimated a low 6-digit saving for moving to ANF. After 1 year, they'd broken into a 7-digit saving. So when customers, or when I hear that ANF is expensive, that's the anecdote I always tell.
And you know what? That is super, super insightful. Not only just performance, but optimization and efficiency. And do you know what, guys? I'm sure I've read or seen somewhere that the AMD CTO, he said something similar around Azure NetApp Files is essential for achieving performance and storage. So not only as Anthony told us a story, but if AMD CTO can say something like that, and remember they have high-end processors and are a market leader, then I think it speaks absolute volumes about the solution and tool set.
Yeah.
Go on,
Yeah,
John.
no, you're not. It really does, Ty. I think, the big takeaway for me is ANF, it's enabling things in the cloud that were previously thought impossible, right? The stuff that you've told us now about, Anthony. So whether it's ultra-fast databases or big ERP systems like SAP for HANA or high-speed analytics, it's doing that in this really reliable and simple way that is going to be great for all enterprises, right? So look, guys, this has been such a great, insightful chat. So, kind of let's try and get a bit of a conclusion now, maybe get a few calls to action here. So, to all the tech savvy leaders that you're listening to this show at the moment, if you've been holding back on cloud migration purely because of performance or complexity fears, it might be time to have a bit of a rethink. With Azure NetApp Files, you've got that ability now. It's essentially saying challenge accepted, right? It's going to bring the performance and the best on-prem storage with the agility of Azure. As we've just discussed in this episode, it can even save costs and reduce risk in the long run. And that's great kind of 7-figure cost savings for certain customers. What do you think, Ty?
Absolutely. I mean, our challenge, in fact, to everybody who's watching is go and try it, give it a spin. You can look for that weird, wonderful, and gnarly workload that everyone says you can't run in the cloud, and then see if you can get it to perform. We can start super small. I think now it's as low as 50 gig volumes, and then you can scale up and down as needed. But you know what? With people like Anthony, our Azure specialist and NetApp specialist, we're all here to help and support, and we like a challenge. Anthony, what do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the great thing about Azure to do proof of concepts, if customers already have Azure environments up and running, is very easy, and ANF is exactly that. So if you're thinking about it, go and play with it. You can spin it up, you can test it, you can turn it off, and that's really the only way to really get a true benchmark of whether it will deliver, is to do it in situ with the applications and the workloads to actually challenge it. We've seen some recent additions to the service as well, like the flexible service level, and even recently the Azure Migration Assistant, which is enabling customers running on NetApp on premises to actually speed up those migrations using ANF Migration Assistant into ANF. But if customers want to do more, check out the Microsoft Learn page. There's a What's New on ANF there, so you can keep up to speed with all the improvements that Microsoft are bringing to the platform.
Anthony, it's been a blast. Thank you so much for joining us and putting up with me and Ty grilling you on ANF now. Really great to see you again, and thanks for your time today, matey.
Thanks, guys. It's been a privilege. Thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed the chat.
No, thank you. And to our listeners and viewers. And as always, hopefully you liked it. So like and subscribe. And we're not just here to, be informative. We want to make it fun. But John, over to you. Close it out, please, mate.
Yeah, I guess until next time, everybody, I'm John and Ty. We're going to sign off now. Stay cloudy and never let a myth stop you from innovating. Okay, Azure NetApp Files might just be the hero you didn't know you needed. See you next time.
Take care, everyone. Bye.